Anila, thank you so much coming here, talking with Voice of America Persian Service. We are thrilled to have you here.
Thank you for having me, and I say salam
Thank
to
you.
all your audience that is watching us.
Let me start with something, because you're very interesting to talk to, but let me start with something. You're head of an association here in the United States. Tell the name. The name itself, it has lots of meanings into it. Just let me.
Absolutely. It's called the American Muslim and Multifaith Women's Empowerment Council. It's a mouthful, but it is including all people of all faiths and all beliefs, and some people with no beliefs. We want to be inclusive and open to everyone. But most importantly, we want to promote the moderate Muslim voice. And that is why the majority of our organization, mostly women, are moderate, proud Muslim Americans.
I'm not touching the mouthful part, but there are two key things over there, which is just, even for when you hear it is a little bit shock for you. First of all, women empowerment, which we are dealing with most of the Middle East and most of the Asia, and we know how it is over there. The other is multi-faith, again in a region and area that tolerance has not had a chance to really go in through.
Yes.
How hard it is to even start talking about these issues?
Well, it was very hard. At first we were trying to be very politically correct, and we were towing the line. I'm talking about 15 years ago, Kembis. We started our organization in 2008, and then we got registered. By the time we started officially, it was 2011. And since then, looking at American organizations that claim to be the voice for all Muslims, but when you join them, they tell you to sit in the kitchen because you're a woman and serve the people. It could be a journalist from New York Times, and they'll tell you, oh sister, you can sit in the kitchen, you can help serve, you can come from that side. And for me, that is not Islam. Islam is actually a religion which liberated women. In Arabia, women were being buried, little girls were being buried alive. So for me, it's like Allah decided to send the last prophet there because he wanted women to be alive. And today, in all these misogynistic, patriarchal Muslim organizations that we have in America, we have to fight for respect. We have to fight for freedom of thought. I mean, you know and I know that this country is the best place for us to be Muslims. I can say what I want. We are allowed to be Shia, we are allowed to be Ahmadi, we are allowed to be Sunni, and there is no persecution on us. And then you find our own Muslim organizations. They don't like you if you're Shia, if they're Sunni. They don't like you if your Ahmadis are excluded totally. And then, women who have a voice, we are harassed, we are intimidated. When we get elected to Muslim, councils, and when we get elected to the mosque boards as treasurer or president, I can't tell you the harassment we face. And most of the time we're told, no, you can't say this. Why can't I say this? So many of my women who have become members of boards of these organizations, they are told, oh, you can't do interfaith because you don't wear a hijab. Now, Iran, the women are struggling. They're dying because they don't want that, forced on them. And here we're living in America and we're still being excluded. Where is the voice of the moderate Muslims? Where is the voice of men standing with us? So that kind of bigotry, it just made a whole lot of Muslim women like us come together and say, we're going to change it. And if they will not give us equal respect, we are going to make our own organization. It will be our own platform. So Alhamdulillah, we have survived the cancel culture. We have survived the onslaught of hate by our own people. Majority of them have been our own people that have attacked us. But, God is great.
One thing I want to quickly say, that journalist that tells you you can stay at the kitchen and do the work, isn't it that the same message that men will give in Middle East to women when they
Yes.
want to do something? They say, your work is in the kitchen
In the kitchen.
and doing the dishes.
Yes, yes. You know, Candace, I also had to learn all of this. I had to learn, as my daughter was growing up in America, I have a son and a daughter, and she would tell me, Mom, you never ask Danny, my son is Daniel, she'd say, you never ask him to come in the kitchen. And I realized that that is the training, that is a part of our culture. It is in our DNA that we are told the boys study, they are, you know, like the patriarch, the king of the house. I had to change that mentality, and thank God my daughter told me. And then I started like hounding my son, come in the kitchen. No, you have to help as much as my daughter is being asked. If she's asked to serve and to help, you're going to be doing the equal portion. And you know, it's not that I came to America with all these, defying all these gender roles. I had some that I brought with me. But you look here and you look and see how are the people living. The men live with respect for their wives. They don't sit there and say, oh, can I have a cup of tea? And it is understood that the wife has to be subservient and she has to bring it. Unfortunately, our communities come to the United States. They say they want to come for freedom. And then when they come here, they bring all those values that are so anti-Islam and anti-American. You know, my grandfather, he was born somewhere in India, maybe 150 years ago. He treated my grandmother with the utmost respect. That's what I saw my entire life. And just yesterday I was speaking somewhere and I talked about how I did not see patriarchy. I saw a matriarchy in India. The Muslims, you know, there that were the leaders, even though the women may not have gone to school 200, 300 years ago, but their husbands allowed them to read. They would educate them. They would include them. You have so many scholars that have come out of Iran, of India, the pre-partition India, that talked about the real Islam, where women got equal respect. Women were allowed to work. And you'll be shocked. There was an imam who wrote an article about 5-6 years ago in a major Pakistan daily. And that article was that women are not allowed to work with namehram, you know, somebody they can get married to. So I went up to that scholar, very esteemed scholar, and I said, Imam Saab, Dr. Saab, you wrote that and it's not true. And you know that does not apply to today, because Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his wife was a CEO. And she did not ask him if she can go to work. She showed the rest of the Muslim women to come how to live their lives like a CEO, like an educated woman, go to school, run a business. And he said, oh sister, I'm sorry, I'll change that. Unless we call this misogyny, these misinterpretations of Islam that are being used against us as women, we are not going to be able to change. Because the patriarchy that our Muslim leaders have brought into this country, it is working against us. So yes, I have to deal with those cultures, those ideas of gender-based roles here, when I didn't see a lot of them in the country that I came from.
Quick thing also on the wife of Prophet, she was also older than him, so.
Oh my gosh, I tell you that our Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, he shattered all the taboos. He was working for a woman, she was 25 years his senior. She was a businesswoman, one of the very few successful women in, at that time, Arabia. And she asked him for his hand in marriage. Now, tell me if that's not shattering taboos for all of us. When I was faced with a lot of like misogynistic ideas, I lived in the 90s in Saudi Arabia for 5 years, and I had joined this dars group, and they would tell me, women can't do this, you can't wear a lipstick, you can't work with men. And I would say, okay, I looked at the Quran, I've looked at the Prophet's life, and I don't see that. And they would say, no, you can't, it's namehram. And you can come up with bad ideas, evil ideas about another man. And I said, but isn't that jihad? that we get rid of the bad ideas and we promote the good thoughts and feelings. And they said, no, 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 you can't do this, you can't do that. Now look at the Saudi Arabia, you know, it's changed. It's become so much more progressive. But all of these ideas are actually inherent in a majority of the mosques that you go to, because you'll see there's a separate entrance for women. And if you try to go through the male entrance, they'll say, no, 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 don't go here. It's like Saudi Arabia 20 years ago when there were mutawwas saying in front of the holiest place for Muslim, the Kaaba, telling me, you know, cover 2 hairs that are showing, and then I would get beaten up. Or your hands have nail polish, whack, whack, whack. These are the types of things that Muslim women today are experiencing in America. And I think it's time for us, women like me, to rise and say, we don't want that kind of behavior because our Prophet and his wife did not exhibit it. We have to change it, and we need the help of men like you.
Well, also a quick thing on the point of jihad. I think the concept of jihad, the larger jihad and the smaller jihad. I think the larger jihad is they have to go through with yourself,
yes,
instead of going outside like jihad akbar and asghar. So
yes, yes.
Which means the hardest part is you have to go through it, not impose it on others.
Yes, and I mean, we all know. I think since I was a child, I was always given la ikraha fid din. In the Quran, it says there is no compulsion in religion. And it says that because there was a woman whose children were Jewish in the tribe that he lived in. The Jewish people actually gave Prophet Muhammad refuge and his people. And she said, you know, my children are still Yahud, and should I ask them to convert? And that verse was La ikraha fid din. There is no compulsion in religion. And I ask our imams, why are we converting people by force? Why are we doing that? Shouldn't our conduct, our language, our behavior be the invitation for other people to join our religion? We can't just go to people and say, you know, this is the right way. I feel whenever somebody tells me that the only way to God is this way, I think twice. And I think, no, there are many ways to God. And the moment you start saying, you know, this is the only exceptional way, that is when you're actually going against Islam, because of the history of Islam. You know, you remember the golden era of Islam was when Muslims, Jews, Christians and others were living in, in Iraq, in the Andalusia region, and they were studying together. They were reading Plato, they were reading Aristotle, and they were creating things. They weren't destroying things. And that was the unity that I always read in my history books. And I said, oh my God, we are all people of the book, and everybody else is also, they're also children of God. God has created all of them. And we must live together. I never grew up with the kind of hate that I see today in America, in my own people, and it shocks me. The bigotry, the double standards. And I feel as Muslim women, as mothers, and today I look at myself as an American grandmother. I have a 3-year-old granddaughter, and I feel, what am I leaving her? Is she going to be able to go to a mosque? Because my son was never able to go to a mosque and come back happy, because he would always call and say, Mom, in this mosque all they're talking about is you have to do jihad, you have to hate this people, sometimes it's this conflict. And I would say, why don't you go to the imam and say, teach us about how to be a good Muslim living in America and being kind to our neighbors, and how we can give back to the community. And you know, he's a kid, he's just come out of UCLA, and he doesn't have all that knowledge to go and combat these ideas that are being, you know, filtered out into our youth and our community. And that's why, you know, today when I was in Israel and I went there to combat the misconception about Hamas, you know, Israelis made up October 7th. My people were telling me Israelis, they deserved it for the 70 years of oppression.
What do you mean, my people?
The Arabs, the Muslims. They were telling me, when I said Hamas has stolen our religion. This is 9/11 all over again. And they told me, no, you know, the Israelis, they deserve it. They deserve what Hamas gave them for the oppression against Palestinian people. And I said, you know, nobody deserves their women to be raped. Nobody deserves their heads to be cut in the name of Allah. Allah's name is very sacred. And instead of this, how about we all as Muslims turn around and say, why don't we push the Abraham Accords? If UAE, if Morocco, if Bahrain, these are Muslim countries, if they can say, let's sit down for the Palestinian people and make peace, then why are we saying that Hamas and their call for the violent jihad, the killing of the Jewish people, and saying we are going to heaven? That has to change. It is not the Islam that most of us grew up with. And it horrified me more to hear it coming from my interns who were 19 years old, who were American. They hadn't even gone to the conflict zone. They knew nothing. All they heard was chatter in the Muslim Students Associations on TikTok. And they started showing me verses from the Quran and telling me that because I'm standing with the Jewish people, me, my family, my children, we'll all be going to hell. If that's the state of our children growing up in America, we really have to reckon with what is happening. I definitely do not want my granddaughter to grow up and to go to a mosque and hear that, to go to a Muslim Students Association at campus and hear that, because that is not true. It is against every core tenet of Islam. And, you know, I ask my Muslim friends, you know, my followers, say, if that were the case, that God did not want us to trust Jews and Christians and to eat with them and to live with them, then why are our men are allowed to marry them? Then would they be sitting separately? And also, you know, you can't go back and say this is the case, because the two people that the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, turned to when he was being persecuted, first it was the Christian king of Abyssinia. The second people who welcomed his entire tribe, and he knew that, were the Jewish people. And two people that he turned to were the Waraka, his wife's first cousin. When he was getting all the revelations, it was a Christian. And he said, yes, there are, you know, that's how revelations come from Angel Gabriel. Why are we forgetting our history? Why are we forgetting that we are all coming from the same Abrahamic grandfather, Prophet Abraham? And why are we not reading history? Why aren't we opening books? Why aren't we sitting with Jews and Christians and having those discussions and saying, let's come to a decision and let's talk about how we can come together? We are not doing that anymore. All these interfaith talks have collapsed because there were no real, authentic interfaith conversations. And I commend you for having me speak, because these are the kinds of conversations which will bring, you know, the good, bad, and ugly together. And in the end, we'll realize we are one humanity. We are Americans, and we need to come to a, you know, reconciliation that we can all coexist without being violent.
I don't want to get you in trouble with the groups are working, so I'm not going to name names. But yes, why is it that the actual interfaith dialogue has never been conducted, as you mentioned it?
The only time they have not been conducted, because the only time they were happening authentically was a time when I was part of the countering violent extremism after the San Bernardino killing. There were two leaders. One was the counterterrorism chief at that time, Mike Downing, and then the FBI chief. His name was Dave Bowditch. These were two men who gave Muslim women a seat at the table, a seat that was not denied to us by our own Muslim leaders. That is when the conversation was authentic, because there were extremist voices and there were moderate voices. And then the first time Muslim women were included. There was once a whole, you know, campaign to malign me and my organization. And it was in the newspapers, it was in text messages. The text message sent by these civil rights organizations was that Anila and her organization are too close to the Christians and the Jews, so don't associate with them. This was the text message that was sent to the entire Muslim community. Now imagine that that's a civil rights organization. The two leaders who saw this, heard me, they printed out copies of all the articles written against me and one written by me, and they called a meeting of all the stakeholders. And that was on the table. And they asked the people who had written it, said, can you explain this, because this sister is a Muslim and you're maligning her. When we have leaders like that, Kambiz, that is when authentic conversations will happen, because we need to counter these voices. And if we are just going to pander to one extremist voice, usually it's a male voice, and even if they have women, they are token representatives. They are not allowed to say anything. But alhamdulillah, we are all women. We have led this organization with our own money. We started out, it was my teacher's salary, and all the women with me, they were donating money, because we knew that the majority of the Muslims, they are not going to approve of us for a while. And then of course there were people who came and who were with us, which is why we are still standing today. But yes, we need to engage these small non-profits. That is what I say to the Department of Homeland Security. You can't be giving grants to the bigger organization because they make the loudest noise. You have to look at the smaller organizations like ours, women-based organizations, grassroots that are struggling. And they are the ones where extremists, they attack them because they think, oh, they feel marginalized. They're not economically, affluent communities. Let's attack them and let's recruit them. And those are the ones that we work with, because we know how radicalization happens in America. But yes, authentic conversations happen when everyone's included and no one is afraid to speak. There are Muslim I know who are part of these mosques. They message us constantly and they say, sister, can you say this? Sister. There are men imams who have been calling us since October 7th and saying, sister, if you can do this, we want to join you. We are with you. We took 2 imams from New York to the March of the Living in Poland to commemorate, all the lives lost in Auschwitz. He led the prayers and he contacted us. Why? Because he believes in what we're doing. We want more of our men, Muslim men in power, in influence, in mosques. And, we also have madrasas here in America. We want them to come join us. We're not, as Muslim women, we're not asking to lead the prayers. We dare not. But we're asking to have equal space. We're asking to stand with them shoulder to shoulder and say, this is good for our Muslim community, this is good for our prosperity, and in the end, this is good for America if we all work together.
Again, you're fighting 2 complicated things. One is misogyny and patriarchy, the one is prejudice and radicalism. So even one of it's like a too much task to handle, but you have 2 of them. So
yes, it's a very difficult task. But I learned something when I turned 50. I said, okay, I've lived most of my life. Now it's time for me to be honest and not sugarcoat things. Because for 15 years, I was sugarcoating things and saying, hey, brother, we are also, the Prophet said this and the Quran said, it wasn't working. It is only when I started calling a spade, that is when we got heard. Because
like what? Could you give me an example?
So I would name the organizations in America, and I would say, brother, you have been harassing Muslim women. This is my Muslim sister, and she alleges that you have abused her. And I myself, you told me that I could never be friends with Jews and Christians. I live in America. They are my best allies. After 9/11, they stood with me. How could you say that and be a civil rights organization? So I'm not naming any, but I call them out openly on Twitter. And then I built a coalition of the Muslim women and men that were abused, intimidated, harassed by these civil rights organizations. And they are also alleging that a lot of these organizations have ties with Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood, and they have also been getting funding from Muslim Brotherhood and other, Qatar and other outside organizations. The court has asked for their donor list finally after 2 years of struggling. And Kembis, this girl that I'm supporting, she was harassed to the point that she went to hospital with a brain aneurysm. They didn't let her get a job. They did the same thing like me. They sent letters, they sent text messages. She and her family wasn't allowed to go to the local mosque anymore. And she's a hijabi, very pious Muslim. And she still can't get a job because everywhere she applies, this organization sends a letter. Now, she is the leader of the coalition, Muslim Me Too coalition, but she was able to get support from us because I started reaching out and not sugarcoating what I'm saying. There are other organizations that pretend to be, Muslim-Jewish reconciliation. When I joined them, I realized that their only goal was to delegitimize Israel. Now, I'm a Pakistani. I come from a country where Benazir Bhutto, God bless her, she gave her life to fight terrorism. The second time that she was coming into power, when she got, murdered by Taliban, she had told, my sister met her in Dubai, she told her, Fariha, this time when I go to Pakistan, I'm going to change things for Pakistan and for the women. And she was murdered by the extremists. We have seen women role models. We have seen them come out and boldly confront misogyny, bigotry, and tell the truth. Benazir was a beacon of hope for all of us. And if she had lived on, I can tell you, she would have done a lot more for women to change that area. If she had changed it for Pakistan, if she had lived, it would be the same for Bangladesh. But yet, even despite of all of these challenges, India has had a woman prime minister, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and yet in America, we don't have a woman leader. We haven't had a president. And those women like me who want to be a part of, heading these Muslim organizations, the moment we turn around, somebody is given our place. We are not given, leadership, and we are harassed. We are only given, a place next to the men if we are going to toe their line, if we are going to be their token representatives. We need to be authentic, powerful voices along with these people so that we can be the voice for the Muslim moderates.
I want to ask you a Muslim question. I have this question for long, so you're a good person to talk to about that. There are a community of Muslims in China called Uyghurs,
Yes.
Which according to State Department or independent humanitarian sources, they're going through the most horrific situations ever, genocide. But no Muslim country in the world talks about this. We're talking about Qatar and Turkey and Iran and Pakistan, Saudi Arabia. I mean, these countries who have very loud noises when it's come to what's happening to Israel or what Hamas is doing. Zero, not even talking. Why?
That is one of the things that I always struggle with. That why are we ignoring the Uyghur genocide? These are Muslims. Why are we ignoring the Kurdish persecution? Why are we ignoring? We ignored the Rohingya genocide. So many, thousands and thousands of them died. Why did we ignore the Syrian genocide? By Assad. Why did we do that? Are they not Muslim enough for us? The truth lies in our own anti-Semitism. If it's a Jew who's persecuting, that's news. But if it's Chinese, well, Chinese have been investing in Pakistan. They have been investing in Sudan, in Africa, in every country. I believe they've built roads and infrastructure in even European countries. So obviously the Chinese are doing economic diplomacy And so very loud countries like my own, where I come from, Pakistan, they don't want to talk about it because they have very close ties with China. But I think it's a question that leaders, Muslim leaders, should question themselves. Why did you stay silent when the Syrian, which is like the Muslims killing the Muslims, we said nothing? In fact, I remember me and another Muslim brother from California, we went with a Republican congressman, Ed Royce, and we were working together. And we said to President Obama, we need to have a safe zone. What is happening in Syria is not okay. This is in, the time of the Obama administration. And he said basically hands off. And we didn't do anything. I think had that been, Israel attacking Syria, the whole world would have stood with the Syrians. It was the Jewish community that had come to me and said, can we get together with your people and help settle the Syrian refugees in America? Now nobody knows that. Our own Muslims were not interested. Where were these civil rights organizations when the Syrians were killing the Syrians? It was all Muslim. They don't talk about Kurds. They don't talk about, the Rohingyas, because there was no Jew. It was, the Buddhist military regime. So they don't want to talk about it. That has to change. Even now when you look at Yemen, largely the Muslim world was quiet because they love Saudi Arabia, the Sunni Muslim world. And then they started saying a few more things, but they stayed quiet on the Houthis. The Houthis are Iranian. It's the Iranian regime. And it's all Hamas and Hezbollah that is attacking, but they're not going to say anything. So this is the bigotry that we as Muslim women are challenging. In fact, we travel to different countries and we try to meet with women's organizations and we say, let's talk about this together, because women have a very unique way of saying things, and somehow we are heard a little bit more. And men, they go to the mosque and we don't have to, so perhaps they have to face people more. So we give them the leeway. We tell them, okay, we'll do it, but include us. And I myself, our organization with another very, loud Uyghur advocate, she's a professor in New York, we held the first ever Uyghur conference. We also sent one of our board members to China, and we said, don't tell anyone, but just please go travel. She went to the region. She didn't see anything to come back and, to verify the stories of the Uyghurs. And she said, look, I can't lie. They have a perfect plan. Whenever somebody comes and is investigating, they go away with nothing. And then, that's when we had the Uyghur conference and we invited women Uyghurs to come and speak for themselves. And that's when we realized that the crimes against them are horrific, and they've been happening right under our noses. So yeah, we need to be, fair. These are also Muslims. I cried so much for the Rohingyas because even today they're being trafficked. The women in the camps, they're being trafficked. Men and women, actually. What Muslim voices do you hear? Are there any, protests on the campuses for them? No. And also, Iran. Iran is a Muslim country. These girls and women have died, and not now. There was, if you recall, there was Neha 10, 15 years ago. So many Iranian women have given their life, sacrificed. Why were they killed? Because they were trying to say something. They were trying to tell the world of the agony and the persecution they face. Or they were saying, I don't want to cover my hair. It is not compulsory in my religion. Don't force it. What did we do? What protests did we have on campuses for that? And it's simply because there's no Jew, there's no news. And, again, had there been Israel attacking Iran, the Muslim world would have gone crazy. Muslim leaders would have come out and said, don't do this. But, unfortunately, it's our own people.
It's very pleasant talking to you. I'm sure we can talk hours, but we're running out of time. Allow me to ask you the last questions. What needs to be done? not only in the countries that you are targeting, like Iran, Pakistan, Middle East,
Afghanistan.
Afghanistan. I mean, we can't even start that, because
Yeah.
no one talks about them at
Yeah.
all. But
Yeah.
here also, for better understanding and valuing human rights and cooperation, interfaith, what are the things that needs to be done?
I think what needs to be done, one, is we all need to call for honest leadership, brave, courageous leadership. Saudi Arabia, it has made leaps and bounds of progress. Okay, that's a big step. Women don't have to cover their head, they can drive. And for me, I think that's a big step forward. In the same way, we as a Muslim world need to stop coming together in small little GCC countries. We need to have a huge conference and have women voices. Uyghur women, Syrian women, Afghan women, Pakistani women, Bangladeshi women. We need to be inclusive. Indonesian, Malaysian, we need to have all these women represented. And as these people call themselves Muslim leaders, they need to hear us and they need to hear of our plight, that we are not okay with Rohingya persecution of women. We're not okay with Iranian women being killed. And where is that male leadership? If they really want to be our leaders, they need to talk honestly about this persecution. Now, is Syria, I'm really afraid for the Syrian women, because one of the CNN journalists was asked to quickly cover her hair. That wasn't what I'd hoped. I'd hoped that they would have a choice whether to cover or not. But the moment you see these are indicators of extremism, the two indicators of extremism you and I know are women are, marginalized, they're oppressed, and then the minorities are persecuted. I just want those two things addressed by the Muslim leaders, the male leaders, and not just in silos like the GCC, We need that addressed by the leaders of the Muslim world, the custodian of the Holy Mosque, coming out and saying any imam, promoting hate against any other person of other religion or ethnicity, he's not going to be allowed in Saudi Arabia. If you take away the right for someone to do pilgrimage, that's a huge, huge consequence. We need drastic measures like that if we are going to be the real leaders that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, envisioned us to be. Honest, fair, truthful, open, and inclusive, not hateful, not the kind of violence that we see Islam being represented with. I can't tell you how many times people tell me, you're a wonderful woman, leave Islam. And I said, how can I? Because I know real Islam. I know people have stolen my religion. So I think it's time for our leadership to, one, include women and have these global conversations. Syria could become another Afghanistan. Are we not concerned as Muslims? We should be. Why should the West be more concerned? We should be, if we care about our women and minorities.
Thank you so much. Again, fascinating conversation with you, and I thank you for being here.
Thank you, Candice. Thank you for having me.